Shalom everybody, and greetings VFI News supporters and anyone else watching this video. There was some exciting biblical archaeology this week, lending credence to an ancient story as well as prophecy about the end of the world. Meanwhile, current events also made us think about the end of the world. The United States moved assets into position to attack Iran's nuclear weapons program. And hey, Turkey's leader asked his God to destroy Israel. U.S. President Donald Trump is fed up with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Israel's own political leadership is in more turmoil than usual, not to mention the economy. All that and much, much more is just ahead on this week's edition of VFI News from Israel. We start this week's report at the end of the world, literally the Valley of Megiddo in northern Israel, which, as many of you probably already know, is where we get the Greek word Armageddon. Now, many battles have been fought at this place over the centuries, with the most recent one in 1918, when British and French forces under General Allenby wrapped up their Sinai and Palestine campaign with a decisive victory over the Turks and allied German forces. Now, that's a great story which I encourage you to go read up on for yourself, but for now we're talking about the discovery of archaeological relics from a battle that was fought on this ground between King Josiah of Judah and an Egyptian pharaoh named Necho. The story of this battle is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 35 verses 20 to 22 and 2 Kings 23 verse 29. And once again, I encourage you to go read these passages after you finish watching this video, or you can pause the video and go read them if you want. But anyway, a team of archaeologists led by legendary Israel Finkelstein of Haifa University School of Archaeology and Maritime Cultures announced that they'd found large amounts of Egyptian pottery at the site, at a depth which corresponds with the 7th century BC. Now, this pottery is of a type that was used by Egyptian soldiers. Other pottery found at the site indicates the presence of Greek mercenaries, such as accompanied Necho's forces into battle, as we know from other ancient sources written in both Greek and Assyrian. Some of these written sources also speak about a king in the ancient land of Lydia, which today is part of Turkey, who sent Assyrian mercenaries to fight in the campaign alongside Necho's troops. The reason this is important is that the king's name was Gyges, I think I'm pronouncing it right, and many scholars believe that he had another name or another title, and that title was Gog. Ooh, I've got your attention now, don't I, friends? Yes, this name Gog appears in the famous passages of Ezekiel's chapter 38 and 39, which I hope you're very familiar with because they're incredibly important and very relevant to our modern world. And of course, Gog of the land of Magog is also prominently mentioned in chapter 20 of the book of Revelation, also very relevant to our modern world. And that's what we're going to talk about now. I hope this story about archaeology at Megiddo has gotten you in a biblical prophecy frame of mind. And I hope you keep that frame of mind through the rest of the video, because that's the season of history we're in, friends, in case no one ever told you. Well, I'm telling you now. Well, let's start by taking a look at what is the biggest headline in the secular media this week. And it's the biggest by default because it involves the most powerful kinetic force in all of human history, the United States military. Now, the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman, and for those of you who don't know, Harry Truman was the President of the United States who recognized Israel as a modern state. Well, his escorts, the ship, already in the Red Sea, conducting a campaign of airstrikes on the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. Now, I know this campaign has been in the news a lot this past week in the United States for a very frustrating reason, and I don't want to get into that. But the stated goal of this campaign is to force the Houthis to stop attacking ships that are trying to sail through the Bab al-Mandab Straits, which form a gateway between the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. Now, I've explained in the past reports how the actions of the Houthis have damaged the global economy, and they've also terrorized Israelis with ballistic missile attacks. The United States campaign is meant to put an end to this, and it's had some success in eliminating several Houthi leaders and apparently destroying some of their missile launchers and other strategic weapons. However, most military experts agree that in order to get rid of the Houthi threat for good, it would be necessary to launch an invasion of the country and take control of the ground there. This is obviously not going to happen for all kinds of reasons, and anyway, there is another option. The other option is for the United States to strike hard at the source of the Houthis' power, and that is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. Go, U.S., go. All right. By a happy coincidence, this would also solve several other problems the United States and its allies in the Middle East, including Israel, have, chief among them, Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons. This is a story that has been in the headlines off and on for almost 20 years, and now it appears to be coming to an apex, with the IAEA now saying that Iran is on the verge of being able to deploy an arsenal of working nuclear weapons. That's frightful, friends. Now I'm going to switch to commentary mode for a moment because Iran has long been playing the international community with different approaches to this issue. Sometimes they play semantic games that sort of hint that they're threatening to go nuclear. At other times, they angrily deny that they have any interest in nuclear weapons. Then they get huffy that anyone is even asking them questions about nuclear weapons, demanding to be treated with the respect they think they deserve, and then never being satisfied with anything that anyone does to try and treat them respectfully, etc. If the Iranian regime were a person, we'd say they have toxic narcissism along with being morally bankrupt, habitually lying and gaslighting both themselves and everyone around them. Now, when I say this regime is from the pit of hell, I'm not being metaphorical at all. I mean that quite literally. The enemy has only one weapon in his arsenal, and that's lies and more lies. But there are many forms, shapes, sizes, and varieties of lies, and the Iranian regime uses all of them, often at the same time. But again, despite all these obvious flaws, this regime is also in charge of one of the world's most strategically important countries with a sizable percentage of the planet's oil and gas reserves, a very large population, etc. So the responsible adults of the world can't just ignore this regime as much as everyone might want to, the way you really would deal with them by just ignoring them if they were just a person. Now, for the past several decades, United States presidents from both major political parties have tried everything they can think of to try and manage the deeply dysfunctional relationship with Iran, even including limited military strikes during the Reagan administration. But most of the time, America and the rest of the Western powers simply tried to work around the regime in different ways. And with all that in the rearview mirror, we look ahead and see that President Donald Trump is preparing to take an approach that no one else has ever tried, and that is massively attacking Iran with overwhelming military force. In addition to the Truman Battle Group, the USS Carl Vinson and its escorts are on their way to the region from the Far East, and it is probably already within striking distance of Iran. Let us not forget that there are already dozens of U.S. Air Force strike aircraft home-based at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey and Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. There are also large naval forces home-ported in Qatar and elsewhere in the region. Last but certainly not least, the United States Air Force has sent at least 7 B-2 strategic bombers to Diego Garcia, a British-owned island in the Indian Ocean which houses a large airbase jointly operated by the UK and the US. The deployment of all this firepower is meant to send a strong warning to the Ayatollah regime that President Trump is serious, so am I, when he says that Iran must come to the table and negotiate an end to their nuclear weapons program, or else they will be attacked. But this week, the regime gave very strong signals that they are not intimidated and won't be coerced. Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, made speeches this week in which he warned, and I'm quoting him here, that anyone who takes wrong actions against Iran will get a hard slap. Who did that? IRGC commanders have also let it be known that they are pushing for a preemptive strike on Diego Garcia and possibly Israel as well. They have also warned American allies who cooperate with the United States, including the British and Turks, that they will also be targets of Iran's wrath. I'm no military expert, friends, and I'm certainly no rocket scientist either, but I've been in briefings where experts and scientists weighed in on Iran's military capabilities, and I can tell you a few things. I apologize for speaking crudely here, but if I tried to remember all the technical jargon or show you any graphs or charts, it would be worse. To start with, Iran's Air Force is a sad joke, sorry, and is the same with their Navy. The planes and ships they've got are decades old and poorly maintained. The pilots and sailors are poorly trained and even more poorly motivated. Iran's ground army is in even worse shape and is no threat to anyone except Iran's own people. That leaves Iran's ballistic missile and drone forces. These are under the command of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and they are by far Iran's most potent weapons. This is where most of the money Iran has invested in its military has gone for the past 20 years or so. Military experts say that Diego Garcia is at the very extreme range of Iran's drones and out of range of most of the ballistic missiles. Even the drones that can make it all the way to Diego Garcia fly at relatively low speeds and have no stealth capability, which means they would be easy for the United States military to detect and shoot down long before they got anywhere close to the base. Meanwhile, the B-2 bombers can easily fly to Iran, launch their missiles and bombs, and fly back to base. American submarines can also get very close to Iran and launch Tomahawk cruise missiles at Iranian military targets, and Iran has no defenses against this whatsoever. Now, on that subject, Iran's Russian-built air defenses network was shredded. I mean, literally shredded by Israel's airstrikes last October. So any American tactical aircraft coming from Turkey, Qatar, or the aircraft carriers would be able to carry out their strikes without any serious opposition. If the Iranian Air Force managed to launch any of its 40- and 50-year-old fighter aircraft to try and shoot down attacking American planes, they wouldn't be any match for the American fighter escorts. The weapons and equipment the American forces have is of such vast technological superiority that the threat from Khamenei and his military forces can give the Americans a hard slap is so laughable it's actually kind of sad. The American military forces President Trump has sent to sort Iran out can do almost anything without even having to worry about losing a single soldier, airman, sailor, or marine. But if it comes to that, the Iranian losses will be catastrophic, I promise you. It is unlikely that the regime will survive and Iran itself will be economically ruined even more than it already is. This could lead to enormous numbers of refugees leaving that country and going who knows where. Iran is already suffering from severe environmental problems, including water shortages and really awful air pollution in its cities. Now, can you imagine what it will be like and look like after getting bombed and bombarded to smithereens by the United States? We might be about to see what that looks like. Now, at this point, some of you are wondering why I haven't mentioned Israel's likely role in attacking Iran. Well, candidly, I think already Israel has done its part last October when our Air Force demolished Iran's air defense systems and took out a bunch of factories they needed to produce ballistic missiles. It's not unlikely that the Pentagon has told the IDF they don't need our help to hit Iran again, and that we should instead focus on defending ourselves from the likely retaliation by Iran's proxies. This includes Hezbollah and the Iranian-backed Shiite militias and terrorist groups in Syria, as well as in Judea and Samaria. Now, it's hard to believe, friends, but these forces are still threatening Israel with rockets and missiles, including rockets fired into Israel from the Gaza Strip this past week. I can't believe it, how many rockets these guys have. That's why here at Vision for Israel, we have not stopped supplying bomb safety shelters, and I invite you to watch a short video about this project now. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. And Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected.
Now that's a good pivot point to the news about Israel's more immediate security problems. The war in the Gaza Strip is proceeding at a slowed down pace because there is some negotiating going on to try to finally resolve the issue of hostages. Israel is waiting for Hamas to reply to proposals for trading the remaining hostages for a long-term ceasefire. But the IDF has assembled and deployed large forces to move in and finally crush Hamas once and for all. Crush them, if they are not ready to give up just yet. The Air Force and some ground forces have already been sent in and have eliminated several high-ranking Hamas leaders in the last 2 weeks, as well as taken back control of key terrain, including the Netzarim corridor. Hamas has also brutally put down a movement by Gazans to protest against their continued rule in the Strip, including by publicly murdering leaders of the protests. That, at long last, has managed to upset some Western media outlets and motivate them to finally ask serious questions about Hamas's legitimacy. Better late than ever, and it's too bad that this is what it took. A bit further to the south, there is growing alarm as the Egyptian army continues to deploy more and more forces into the Sinai Peninsula. This, by the way, is a violation of the 1979 Camp David Accords, and although the ostensible reason is to fight against terrorist groups and criminal syndicates in the region, much of the training that these forces are carrying out appears to be aimed at attacking a regular army. Needless to say, the only regular army they might encounter in the area is the IDF. So who do they think they're kidding? Now, in the northern arena, the IDF has hit Hezbollah targets in Lebanon over the past week in response to rocket fire from that country, although Hezbollah denies it was responsible for the rockets, and I even believe them possibly. To switch back to commentary mode for a moment, Hezbollah, which not so long ago was effectively a sovereign power in its own right within Lebanon, has been reduced to almost begging Israel not to hit it in responsible actions of other armed groups. Hezbollah is also under tremendous pressure from the Lebanese state, as the Lebanese National Army has taken very strong action against them in southern Lebanon. This is good to see. And there are even quiet discussions going on about Lebanon joining the Abraham Accords. Hezbollah is furious about this, of course, but frankly, no one seems to care much about what they think anymore. Neither do I. Israel has broken their power, and the other factions in Lebanon are moving decisively to take their country back. As an aside, that might be what will happen in Iran if the United States breaks the power of the regime. The ordinary people of Iran might then be able to rise up and take back control of their country. Rise up. I like those words. Rise up. Just like the people in Lebanon are doing now. It's worth hoping and praying for. Also on the northern front, the IDF has established a strong presence in the buffer zone between Damascus and the Golan Heights. The Air Force is also hitting strategic weapons stockpiles left behind by the Assad regime, although the pace of those strikes is a fraction of what it was in the days immediately following the downfall of the Assad regime. It seems like most of that stuff has been demolished or otherwise accounted for, but there is evidence that the IDF and Mossad are continuing to operate deep inside Syrian territory, probably finding all kinds of new information all the time, as well as good restaurants, I suppose. So there's a possibility that more strikes are coming. On the other hand, Israel is not the only neighbor of Syria that is deeply involved in what's happening there. Turkey is also setting up operations there and even exploring the possibility of building bases for its own air force in central Syria. No, no, no. Israel has, if you'll recall, pushed for the retention of Russian presence in Syria. And some people might be wondering why Israel would do that. The reason is that although it's uncomfortable having a Russian military presence in Syria, having a Turkish military presence there is much, much worse for the Jewish state. A demonstration of just how much worse it could end up being for us was provided this past week by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. At an Eid al-Fitr celebration this past week, and Eid al-Fitr is a major Muslim religious holiday for those who don't know, Erdogan asked his God, whose name I don't even want to say, to quote unquote bring destruction upon Zionist Israel. Now for background, friends, national leaders in this part of the world tend to see themselves as instruments of the divine will, especially divine wrath here on earth. There are many examples of it from the Bible up until the present, and sometimes it's maybe even true. But most of these guys who think they're doing God's will on earth were actually doing the will of someone else, often themselves, and sometimes even more often Satan, the devil. Now, Erdogan is definitely an example of someone who thinks he's got a destiny, and from the way he talks, he seems to think that his destiny involves attacking Israel and even destroying it. This is, by the way, the same thing that motivates the Ayatollahs in Iran. It also motivates the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is a franchise, and it also motivates many others. But Erdogan stands out in this category because he's the head of state in a country with vast military and economic resources, as well as cultural influence and diplomatic weight. Therefore, the power he can bring to bear against Israel, like the power the Ayatollahs in Iran have, needs to be taken seriously and pushed back against strongly. On the other hand, like the Ayatollahs in Iran, he's also got intense domestic opposition. In the last week, enormous crowds of anti-regime demonstrators have poured into the streets of Turkish cities to protest against his policies, including arresting the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, who is widely regarded as a serious challenger to Erdogan in the upcoming presidential election. Will Erdogan try to divert attention away from his domestic problems by lashing out against Israel? That's a distinct possibility, as opposition to Israel is widespread among the Turkish general public, including the opposition. Now, I'm personally shocked to be saying that, since Turkey was a friend and ally of Israel for most of my life. But that all started to change back in 2003 when Erdogan first came to power. His Muslim-affiliated political party has managed to shift Turkish culture and public opinion a lot in a fairly short period of time. And we should all remember that can happen anywhere. It's happening in Egypt too, by the way. And that adds fuel to the worries that we have over what I said earlier about the buildup of the Egyptian army troops in the Sinai Peninsula. Now, we're almost out of time for this report, and I want to talk briefly about Israel's domestic issues. The political scene here is tense for all kinds of reasons that I can do an entire other video about. I've predicted more than once that we'll be going to elections here in Israel sometime in 2025, and I've also said many times that one day we'll wake up and Benjamin Netanyahu won't be prime minister anymore, and the political deck in Israel will be thoroughly shuffled when that happens. The results are possible to predict, but there will definitely be big changes coming. Now I want to continue the tradition of ending with some positive news, but I have to start by telling you some bad news. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, issued a report this week about Israel's economy, and the bottom line is we're still in very bad shape. There was some good news, economic news, from ratings agency Fitch, which kept our credit rating unchanged instead of downgrading it, but candidly that won't help ordinary working class people in Israel much, at least in the short term. Now here's the great news. VFI, Vision for Israel, has many projects to help people in Israel get through these tough economic times, and you can be part of it. So here's a short video which will show you just how you can partner with us. We all know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Well, I hope that blesses you, friends, and I hope your lives are blessed. So until next week, I'm Barry Siegel, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. Shalom, shalom. God bless you.